Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to some of you, and to others, good evening. Welcome to OBIC's Moving Open Banking Forward in Canada, the roles of industry and government. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. This is a fantastic opportunity for everybody to learn more about private industry and government's actions here in Canada from some of what I would say are some of the most brilliant individuals I know in open banking here in Canada. I am Chris Clapton. I will be your host today, as well as the Executive Director of Open Banking Initiative Canada. We have a fireside chat format today with an open Q&A at the end. We'll try and time block each of the topics so we can cover them off appropriately and efficiently. And so today's chats will cover off the delays to open banking in Canada and the framework and its impact, the potential role of open banking in recovering from COVID-19, and ways private industry can work with government leaders to reinvigorate Canada's open banking progress, as well as how private industry, perhaps how they can bring a framework to Canada before an official government framework has been established. Also, we've got some exciting breaking news involving OBIC and private industry. And yet, before we get into our introductions for our guest panelists, let's do a short introduction on OBIC for those of you who may not have heard about this movement here in Canada. Last September, a market-led group of entrepreneurs, academics, those from fintech, payments, as well as the, I'll say the challenging bank or challenger bank industry came together and in Toronto and made a decision that there needs to be a central group that really moves forward the idea of open banking for the SME industry itself here in Canada. So we exist here, we're a market-driven open banking framework. The intention here is to really gather great individuals, great thinkers who see the future and the impact of open banking on the fabric of the Canadian culture itself. So ultimately, we want to give control and choice to Canadians over their financial data. And our big intention here is to launch a proof of concept this year. From our gathering of, I will say, great minds last September, we really gave thought and mind and heart thinking, I will say, to the idea of open banking. We just didn't want to be a copy paste from other initiatives in other regions and jurisdictions around the world itself. So we asked ourselves what open banking in Canada could be. And this was the definition or a result of our efforts in the day that we spent together. And so this really is the key motivating factor or our key definition behind open banking. And ultimately, this is what really moves us forward. Our mission is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of disparate groups here in Canada that are really motivated to see the idea of open banking and really the benefits and the value proposition of it. And yet there was not a single voice, what I could say, where these groups could actually collaborate and move forward in a cohesive manner. And so really our mission is to be that single collaborative voice in the financial services industry that represents the viewpoints of key participants, ultimately consumers, fintechs, banks, and industry experts themselves. And as our objective is to launch a proof of concept, it really, that was the big, I'll say the key aspect for us. We all have heard about there's a lot of talk about open banking in Canada, and really we wanted to move beyond that vaporware or paperware and really start to demonstrate the value of open banking to the Canadian industry itself, to consumers, to the financial industries, and to really move it forward. Okay, so that's enough about OBIC. Now let's get into our guest introductions here. So as I said earlier, we're so fortunate to have such a panel of experts who are brilliant thinkers. So let's meet them. So our esteemed guest, the Senator Colin Deacon, he is an entrepreneur at heart. He's Canada's #1 proponent for open banking. He passionately led the development of the Senate's report on open banking, and I think one of the finest gentlemen supporting the Canadian fintech industry. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you very much, Christian, and you're over the top on that intro, and I was glad to work with my colleagues in the Senate. And I don't know if you can see my screen, but I'm holding a copy of our report. I'm told it's one of the most read reports that the Senate's produced in recent years, and I reread it regularly because I'm just so proud of how strong our recommendations were and how clear we were in our focus. That this has to be about consumers, and if you look at our very first recommendation in the report, it talks about empowering the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada with the ability to start to become a leader in this, because we saw such benefits for consumers and small business, and the financial technology opportunities to empower people who are underbanked or unbanked and businesses that didn't have access to credit were just so significant that it really inspired us all. And that came from a position where our colleagues at the beginning in February, when we started our study in February 2019, were not at all in favor of open banking, and were won over by the evidence over that period of time to the publishing of our report in June. So if you think about the fact that the Minister of Finance launched his internal review at September 2018, we did ours starting in February 2019. We published our report in June 2019, and he received his at that time, but he didn't put it out till January of 2020. So I think we moved swiftly, and our work was really strong. We got a really good focus of our recommendations, and I'm deeply proud to have worked with my colleagues on this. So thanks for including me today. Thanks, Christian.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. Our second guest is Hanna Zaidi. Hanna is someone who understands the value of strategy and regulation in the banking industry. Her past experience at the big banks as an entrepreneur and a fintech advisor leads key insight to her current role as Senior Manager of Regulations Operations at Wealthsimple, one of Canada's leading fintechs. And in addition to her role at Wealthsimple, I am proud to share that Hanna is a board member at OBIC. Welcome, Hanna.
Thanks so much, Christian. Really excited to chat with everyone and present today.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Hanna. Would you be so kind to share with us your views or perspectives on open banking?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a step back and maybe try to define what I think and Wealthsimple views as open banking. And so open banking would mean that you decide how and when and with whom you share your financial data. So a lot of people think that this is already happening, but unfortunately that's not actually the case. So under the current system, it's actually at the bank's discretion as to when you share your information and with whom. So open banking would mean that you would decide whether it's with a different bank, your accountant, or another fintech company like Wealthsimple. So I can actually tell you from firsthand experience that the lack of access to data is one of Wealthsimple's biggest hindrances when it comes to making better products and making them available for everyone. So when you have less competition and innovation, you end up with a financial system that has some of the highest fees in the developed world. But if we had a system where it was really easy to compare prices, features, and fees, and it was easy to switch services with a tap of a button, banks would really have to compete for your business.
Right on. Great points for sure. I mean, there is the opportunity here for innovation to really help with the Canadian consumer with unique products and services that actually fit where they are in their financial livelihood for sure. So thank you for that. And I look forward to hearing more about your perspective. Now, we are also privileged to have a central figure of the UK open banking movement and one who was instrumental in standing up open banking in the UK, which has been no small feat. He has led the development of open banking standards as well as the compliance and commercial requirements needed for open banking to flourish. Additionally, he is a CEO and founder of Ozone, a providing leading global platform which assists financial institutions in meeting their regulatory requirements. Welcome, Chris Michael.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for the intro, and very honoured to be on this panel. I think it's interesting. I just maybe wanted to kind of pick up on a point that sometimes I think gets missed about open banking. I think it's a very generic concept that could, in theory, and maybe should mean any type of a customer being able to give any type of access to an authorized third party. So it's not just about access to data. I think it's, it could be extended to a number of different things. In the UK and Europe, it includes On the plus side, I suppose it includes access to third parties to make payments on behalf of a customer. So the kind of payments initiation API, which is, we're just starting to see that take off in the UK. That's very powerful. But maybe the limitation in the UK and Europe is that it's a limited set of data. So it's not all financial data. It's limited to certain accounts and a small subset of the data that financial institutions have. So I think there are pros and cons of what we're doing in Europe, but certainly it's been very interesting to be part of that journey. And my kind of vision for this is really to help other markets learn from what we've done well and maybe what we haven't done so well in the UK and Europe. And that should be a reason, and there are a lot of very good reasons why this can be much quicker and much lower risk and lower cost in other markets. So very excited to be part of this movement at the early stages in Canada.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. All right, before we get into our topics for the day, let's bring everybody up to speed on the latest developments here in Canada. There are open banking developments, believe it or not. And so the first one off the top here is PwC was recently awarded the contract for the second round of the consultations on open banking. Senator, could you share your thoughts with us on this consultation, part two?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. And I just offer that there is such a great opportunity for Canada to be a fast follower. And I think that was really well outlined just by Chris a second ago. I'm not convinced at all. I'm seeing evidence that says that Finance Canada and our finance minister at this stage are not at all interested in being fast followers. It concerned me that he waited 7 months to release a report that he had in June 2019, and he released it on a Friday afternoon in late January. That's not a time to have something take a lot of notice. It was great to see the name change to consumer-directed finance because it puts the focus on consumers, and that for us in the banking committee was absolutely crucial. But then things were further delayed with COVID, and because we couldn't have large public gatherings, the Finance Canada delayed consultations when the whole world is having meetings like we're having right now, and virtual meetings can happen. So that indicated that might have been an excuse versus a reason for delaying things. We then had the fintech lenders not allowed to be into the part of the solution in delivering COVID relief to the small businesses that they serve, so their customers had to go elsewhere. So that was a concern. So we're just seeing, for me, a pile up recently, the $1 million over 5 years to move things along at Finance Canada says they're not really putting a lot of weight behind moving this forward. And then the PwC contract, I think, is great, but it's another 6 months of waiting for consultations to be designed versus consultations moving ahead. So for me, I'm certainly feeling like Finance Canada is dragging its heels at this point, and the minister is not prioritizing this issue. And so when I saw that, it was, for me, a concern, because there's such an opportunity for us to be a fast follower. There's so many benefits to Canadian consumers and small business that require government leadership and regulatory involvement. And there's an opportunity for the regulators to lean in here and really take advantage of all the experiences, as Chris just said a second ago, all the experiences globally, to make sure that Canadians get the productivity boost that we're going to need post-COVID, thanks to having our banking system as competitive globally and productive as possible for Canadians that are struggling in the post-COVID environment. So, you know, for me, it was a bit of a lunch bag letdown when I saw that.
Thanks, Senator. I mean, on that note, there has been, you know, what I'll say from a market-led perspective, a development with FTX, and there was an announcement last week that there was a Canadian chapter of FTX, and perhaps, Chris, you can help us understand what this means for open banking in Canada.
Sure. So FTX, for those who don't know, is the Financial Data Exchange. Is a non-profit standards body that's been around for a number of years now in the US. It's sort of if you like, its members are a sort of who's who of financial institutions in the US, not just banks, but other providers, and also a number of other leading third-party providers and fintechs such as Ozone. We also are members of FTX in the US. a few years ago, when we developed the standard back in the UK, we partnered with the OpenID Foundation to develop a security profile, a model that defines how you can create these open APIs in a way that's totally secure from a customer protection point of view and protecting all parties, actually. So what was very heartening last year was that FTX announced an alignment with the OpenID Foundation, so that both the FTX standard in the States and the UK standard both share this same security profile as the kind of security model which protects these APIs. And I think that's an important lesson in terms of not reinventing the wheel. Let's work towards kind of global standardization on things like that. And then FTX now announcing their Canadian chapter. I mean, that's something that as Ozone, we're also members of this Canadian chapter, because we would like to see a very quick iteration of the FTX standard to cover the requirements and needs of the market in Canada. I think it's hopefully a fairly small delta. There will be some differences in some of the kind of product definitions and API definitions, but my hope is that a Canadian variant or version of the FTX standard will be a fairly small delta. And as I said, if that's also based on this kind of security model that's been adopted in the UK, not only in the UK, but also now, I think, by the Consumer Data Rights Controller, I think what we're going to see is hopefully something that can be implemented very quickly and with certainty that there is a very robust common standard. And the good thing about the FTX standard is it doesn't just cover banks, it covers all manner of financial products, including tax, insurance, investments, savings, pensions, etc. So, having a very comprehensive standard like this that's pretty much ready to go, this is certainly doesn't solve the problem for Canada overnight, but it certainly is one very major hurdle. It took in the UK, it took us at least a couple of years to get the standard up and running. And then that was 2 years ago, and another couple of years we're still sort of refining things. So having a standard that's pretty much ready to go is a real enabler.
That's great, Chris. Thanks for that. And that's a big movement here for us in the fintech industry, that we can have a common standard that's Canadian that we can work against. So this is fantastic. Thank you. All right, let's move into our first topic of discussion today. There have been delays to Canada's open banking framework. We've heard a few of them already. Obviously, the latest being COVID. While other countries such as the UK and Europe are now benefiting from open banking, Senator, from your perspective, what are some of the prominent negative impacts of these delays on Canada, and from that perspective of open banking not being available?
It's an important question, Christian, because I think that open banking is viewed to bring risk with it by some that are not totally on side. And I look at the risks of not bringing forward open banking, and I think they're evident in the COVID crisis. Have been magnified. The Bank of England released a report in March of this year indicating that over half of small business lending in the UK is being done by non-banks, and fintech lenders are a key part of that. In Canada, the choice was made very clearly by Finance Canada to not include the fintech lenders in their COVID response, which I think it really meant that these businesses were put at a tremendous disadvantage. Not just the small businesses that the fintech lenders were lending to, but the fintech lenders themselves at a competitive disadvantage globally. Many of them were actually part of the Small Business Administration processes in the US. And what was really interesting to me, just to see the power of what fintech enabled banking can do. There was the example of Cross River Bank in New Jersey, which when I read that about a month ago or whenever it was, I was just blown away by the fact that they were lending more than big banks like BMO Harris and as much putting out as many loans as Citibank and Bank of America and Wells Fargo, but at a smaller level, a smaller amount. So it really clearly identified that they were lending to much smaller businesses. And that's, fintech lenders have found a way, and we saw data from the Philly Fed. They did an analysis that's been published that showed that the algorithms that have been developed by our fintech lenders are successfully lending to small businesses that wouldn't get loans under FICO scores in the US, under traditional bank lending methods. So that's to me, at a time when business needs credit more than ever, that was just a very sad missed opportunity for Canada. And I think, use an intermediary to help manage that process. Finance Canada got a lot of options put forward to them. And that to me was what I was left with as sort of something that really has not helped Canada. And I'm really hoping that we can start to move that ahead.
From a perspective of fintech, what do you see, Hanna, the impact of these delays?
Yeah, I'm actually really glad Senator Colin Deacon mentioned the risk of not having open banking in place. And, as a fintech, we try to figure out ways in which we can continue to move forward and innovate. And not just fintechs, but most financial services companies. But this creates gaps. There's a lot of gaps in terms of what regulation and protection currently covers, and what companies are doing for the sake of being able to create a good user experience. So I'll give you a tangible example. Currently, if a Canadian banking customer wishes to make their financial data available or share it with a third party like Wealthsimple, the process is really inefficient and cumbersome. And so in response to this, many companies like Wealthsimple, we've attempted to automate access to people's financial data using aggregation technology or screen scrapers. So most notably, if you're familiar, Plaid, Flinks, there's some other third parties. And so this is where a consumer might choose to enter their information online. They're using their bank ID and password through these third-party applications. And so a Senate banking research paper recently noted that nearly 4 million Canadians were estimated to be using these screen scraping apps. But this is really predicated on shaky foundation. So to give perspective, if a bank decides to change its interface or implement two-factor authentication, it could easily break the service. And also, depending on the bank, that could be a violation of the terms of use for the account because the account owner's authorized access to a third party. And there's also a number of security issues with this model as well. So, this is just one very small example of many in the life cycle within a product, a fintech product or a financial services product, but also just broadly that exists without an actual framework and way to share, without having standardized APIs, so data could be shared more secure and efficient and in a reliable way. And I know I'm constantly focusing on data, but that's largely because, my understanding in Canada, our focus right now is on information sharing when it comes to open banking. And, the conversation is sort of, the scope is kind of limited to that for the time being. And, just to echo concerns about us falling behind, countries like Mexico and Brazil, they released their API standards during COVID, whereas we use that, as an excuse not to. So that's another concern around us falling behind.
Thank you, Hanna. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, access to data really is the lifeblood of any mobile financial application that can, help a Canadian consumer. And so having real-time access to it in a secure manner is greatly important from a financial stewardship perspective. Chris, can you perhaps speak to us about, what, some examples of the UK fintechs and the value that they provided with open banking in this scenario, because you've moved beyond the idea of screen scraping here. So if I can give you about a minute to do that before we jump into our next topic, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think totally echo Hannah's points around kind of the dangers of screen scraping and credential sharing. And in the UK, we've seen certainly a very strong move towards APIs earlier on. The key use cases that we've seen, I mean, the first one to go live in the UK on top of a secure open banking API was Personal Finance Manager. Funnily enough, it was called Yolt, but it's actually a fully owned subsidiary of ING Bank. So it's a Dutch bank who've set up a fintech that provides a personal finance manager platform that was the first to go live across the major banks in the UK. We've then seen a big growth in business accounting packages moving from proprietary feeds or screen scraping. So all the big players that we all know so well, they've all moved over now to open banking APIs. Lending's been an interesting one. I can talk a bit more about this later, but we've seen a lot of lending use cases where not just banks, but other financial institutions, other lenders, non-bank lenders have also been using open banking APIs to make better real-time decision making more securely, or for more responsible lending, more in instantly pretty much as well. And the real kind of growth area that we are just about to see next, I suspect, is going to be around payments. I alluded to this earlier, but using open banking payments as an alternative for many other payment types, like direct credit transfer or even cards in many situations. So, you know, an open banking payment, if it's done well, that's a big if, but if it's done well, it's more secure and a better customer experience than many other, certainly, you know, customers having to enter things like reference numbers or enter in card numbers and addresses and all that. You know, there's no need for real data entry, and it can massively simplify the customer experience and provide much better security and traceability as well. So yeah, those are the kind of prime use cases. I would say the kind of the read API, the account information ones that I spoke about, we've kind of got significant growth. We're seeing in the UK now several 100 million API calls across the main providers, API providers, several 100 million a month, still not massive. We're seeing a sort of 100,000 or thereabouts in terms of payments, so it's much lower, a couple of orders of magnitude lower. But we think payments is going to be the next big growth, and that's not just personal. This is business as well. So businesses paying things like tax bills, payroll, salary payments, supplier payments. Those sort of things are going to be big use cases for open banking.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, let's move on to our second topic of discussion here, and I'm going to direct this at the Senator. As you have a firsthand account of at the government level, I'll say, on the impact of COVID-19 on our country here, what are your thoughts on how open banking can play a key role in leading to the financial recovery of Canada?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that Canadians are, not just the government of Canada and provincial and municipal governments, but Canadians' balance sheets are going to be in pretty crummy shape as we emerge from this recovery and start our recovery from COVID. And we're going to have to work really hard to make sure that all of the most entrepreneurially minded and spirited people in Canada, that in every community, have access to credit and investment through non-traditional means, because the way we've asset-based lending versus cash flow-based lending is going to be it's going to be a thing of the past in helping in this recovery, because people's assets have been so eroded through this period, or will have been, I think, through this period, or the balance sheet at least. So we've got to make sure that we have non-traditional, highly effective ways of getting credit to Canadians so that they can start to work their way out of this hole as we all work together to, you know, deal with. It's not going to be just a $343 billion deficit this one year. The government doesn't turn off the taps that way. We're going to be in a very tough period for a considerable period of time, and we have got to jump Canadian productivity growth up to another level, a level we haven't seen in a generation or two. And the only way to do that is by giving people the ability to use their data in the most productive way for them, and to make sure that they get the most productivity out of every hour that they work in a day, and through each small business and to medium and larger businesses. So global competitiveness and productivity growth are central to us. We've got to harness the Canadian entrepreneurship spirit as much as we possibly can. And the opportunity for Fintechs to help in that, to increase access to credit, to reduce costs and financial friction, are just almost endless in relative terms. And it provides our banks with a way to lever their credibility, which we're very fortunate to have globally respected banks in Canada. And it gives them a chance to lever their credibility globally through networks of Fintechs that they partner with, if we have a balanced system. So for me, it's just so full of opportunity at a time when we'll need it most.
Good points. You know, Chris, perhaps you can speak with regards to, again, UK is far, far ahead of Canada with regards to open banking. And I know I've heard of some examples of fintechs jumping in and really assisting in this period of COVID itself. But what about recovery? Are you hearing or are you seeing any opportunities that fintechs at a granular level are taking upon themselves to assist in the recovery?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, there are a number. I mean, so I think the first and most obvious one is aligned to what I said earlier around lending use cases. So, fintech-based propositions which help customers themselves understand their financial situation better, and also help them get lending in a more responsible way. I think that's absolutely key. Look, this whole crisis has been a challenge for everyone. It's a challenge for many of the big financial institutions, the big banks. It's a challenge for a lot of the fintechs as well, who've been looking to get funding. And what's been interesting to see is how some of the fintechs have changed their business models kind of pretty quickly as well. So that there are examples of fintechs who had a proposition based on individual personal travel, and they've pivoted their proposition now because obviously people aren't traveling as much. Their proposition is now based on international payment, FX payments for businesses, and I think that's an interesting way that a fintech, because it's small and agile, typically can pivot very quickly. We've also seen some of the fintechs supporting some payments. So there was a chap called Captain Tom, who's 100 years old and raised something like £35 million over the last couple of months for the NHS. And one of the ways that became one of the predominant ways that customers could make a payment was via an open banking payment. So, it's and it was a big brand stepping up to offer that. It was actually American Express offering that open banking payment service. So you could use any bank to make a payment via an American Express payment enabled API to make a payment to charity. That didn't account for all of the 35 million that this amazing person raised, but it certainly accounted for a chunk of it. So I mean, look, there's lots of examples that we're seeing emerging out of this, but look, it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge for banks and fintechs, and it will continue to be a challenge, I'm sure. But there are lots of good news stories coming out as well.
And Hanna, what about your perspective on fintechs and recovery in Canada here, especially linking from your role at Wealthsimple?
Yeah, I mean, I think more broadly, I have to echo everyone's thoughts around lending being a really key driver. That could be a really key driver around helping small businesses and entrepreneurs really recover and just generally, So like one of the things that I would say is like fintech lenders have really filled the gap after the 2008 crisis, where banks, their credit boxes shrank. New measures from bank regulators made unsecured lending really uneconomic. So fintech lenders really started to fill this gap. They've developed really innovative underwriting practices, risk assessment tools, and like properly risk-adjusted credit granting mechanisms that really incumbent banks haven't been able to do. And it's something that, we're also exploring on our end and that I'm involved in, but the lending space is actually pretty complicated. And so, being able to better serve higher risk borrowers who don't meet the traditional lending criteria is extremely important. And there's a massive gap. And like Senator Colin Deacon mentioned, we didn't see the Canadian government really looking at fintechs as a viable vehicle to actually provide these funds to small businesses that probably need it the most. And so one way that, we've been looking into, how open banking could further improve, the credit process for small businesses is really by letting banks see their cash inflows and outflows at other institutions. It could also allow for access for like alternative data that provides insights into a company's trajectory. And this could also help lending for incumbent banks, where they get a richer profile of the business's finances, you know, including things like seasonality, when taking into account like credit decisions. And so these are things that, you know, across the board, financial institutions would benefit from. And I think the really interesting thing is that this isn't a new concept. So if you're an e-commerce company and you're on Amazon or Shopify, or you use ClearBank, you know, these companies have gone into small business lending because they already have all this data, and they use alternative data to really underwrite the risk and give out loans. And so, you know, small businesses being the backbone of our economy, giving access to credit, especially in this climate, is really the difference between them surviving or not. And the technology is there, the capability is there. It's really just us, you know, providing that framework on, you know, what's appropriate and what can be done. But again, it's already here.
Awesome. Yeah, great points. Again, leading back to data and the access to data itself. So let's continue along with you here, Hanna. So as part of leadership at Wealthsimple, like I stated earlier, you guys are a well-known Canadian fintech. You also have a presence in the UK, as you're, you know, obviously leveraging the open banking framework there. So with that, then, how can private industry reinvigorate Canada's open banking progress, and then ultimately, how do you see this benefiting government and, you know, giving them some insights? What would be your comments here?
Yeah, so I think there's like a number of use cases where industry can collaborate and, you know, help move the dial forward without having to wait for, you know, the government to establish a framework. Things like identity verification. So having a robust digital identity system that would really help prevent, you know, fraud in an open banking environment, or the, you know, what we're seeing around with the FDX on having like a standard way of sharing information. But I think ultimately, in order to really have like a meaningful framework, we really do need to have government establish a framework. And from what I've seen in other jurisdictions, you know, there's normally like a two-step approach to doing this. And like first is like really developing the foundational pieces and figuring out who has access to data, how do you access data, is there reciprocity? If you tap into a bank, does the bank also have access to the tech company's, you know, data? Indemnity provisions, how do you vet third parties? Is there like a centralized body that allows, you know, to manage this? And this is the hard part. And then, you know, Wealthsimple, we engage in every facet of this on a day-to-day in terms of how we onboard clients and some of the challenges that we deal with. So, you know, we're happy to engage on all elements and aspects of this. And you know, we have a lot of thoughts around how, you know, we think that it could be done well and in a way that benefits the broader ecosystem. And then the second part is really developing that technical solution to like actualize this. So, you know, access to data is like moat for banks, right? When you start letting third parties access data and get access to their customers, a lot of times incumbents, you know, they fear that they'll lose their relationship with their clients. And so this is where fintechs might significantly like benefit from creating that consumer focused product. And I'm happy to provide more, you know, tangible examples on how fintechs or even just Wealthsimple specifically would benefit from, you know, having an open banking framework and where these short-term gains would be. But I'll kind of leave it at that for now.
Sure, that's great. Senator, perhaps you could give your insight with regards to a potential direction on this sort of prescriptive path, potentially for private industry to engage with government, and maybe who's ultimately responsible for the adoption of open banking. It's, you know, we're sort of in a murky time right now where we're looking for someone to take leadership here. What are your thoughts?
And I couldn't agree with you more, Christian. We're in a murky time waiting for somebody to take leadership, and the group that should take leadership is government, in our opinion. I mean, in our report, and I'll just flash it up again, the open banking report that I'm so proud to be a part of, we felt very strongly that Finance Canada needed to take a leadership role. And so that I don't see that FDX diminishes that need. I think it actually accelerates the need for government to have a significant role in what's going on in Canada. So there, from my standpoint, I would spend the time thinking about how FDX operates in Canada to make sure that it has balanced governance, for example. I think that would really help government leaders. Because if the governance of FDX represented consumers, fintechs, and banks and their related organizations in a balanced manner, I think that would say, okay, we've got something here that's protecting all Canadians and the idea of consumer-directed finance. I think if data portability was at the center, that consumers have control over what data is shared, that will help government to be able to embrace and adopt the FDX standards. And I think avoiding scope creep. FDX has got a very clear mandate, and I think that's fantastic that it's got the mandate it has and that's coming to Canada with that mandate. But scope creep could be very dangerous in terms of starting to limit the fields of data that are shared based on those who, incumbents who have, are there to protect their shareholders, for sure. And we need to make sure that consumers, the incumbent banks, and fintechs are all protected in this process. And I think that's what Finance Canada should and would be most concerned about. So the way that private industry can help government leaders is to make sure that an initiative like FDX is quite balanced and brings with it the ability to move that into adoption quite quickly.
Yeah, good points. I think there, you talk about a balanced approach. It's really, there needs to be parity here from all perspectives, whether you're a fintech, whether you're a technical service provider like Ozone and or a bank, there just needs to be a balanced approach. I completely agree. Chris, can you speak more to that? How was there challenges from a parity perspective or a balanced approach? Or did you see any limitations or limiting factors that restricted certain fintechs from engaging in open banking?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think there have been a number of barriers and concerns. I think that what we've had in the UK and Europe is a very regulatory-driven approach, and in fact, in the UK we had two lots of sort of overlapping regulations, which kind of mandated that the banks built a whole load of APIs and did a whole load of stuff. And I think that depending on who you talk to, that might have been necessary to just get stuff up and running. So absolutely, you need some sort of framework. But the main benefit of a framework is as Senator Deacon alluded to, it's got to be to protect the consumers. That's, I think the question or the challenge is going to be, well, actually, just to come back to kind of protecting consumers. I think one of the things that we developed in the UK was something called customer experience guidelines, which really determine how this needs to be clear and transparent and get the right level of kind of positive friction, if you like, into the process for consumers, and what sort of messaging is appropriate at what point in time. This is something that the consumer data right have literally sort of adopted, not just verbatim, not quite verbatim, but in Australia they've copied that, and it's something that's part of now the FDX standard, which are very tightly defined standards that show how this should be presented to consumers to help them. And that needs to be part of it. But I think there are definitely having consumers at the heart is essential for this to work. But I think whether or not this is entirely mandated from a regulatory point of view, or whether it's a market-led initiative, there are lots of different ways of doing this. And I think we'll talk about that in the kind of next section, I think.
Yeah, for sure. While we're there, let's jump into that, Chris. So you were part of the open banking movement, which was really enforced, upon the big banks through the CMA or the Competition and Markets Authority. So, what are your thoughts with respect to a framework for open banking being established unofficially here in the Canadian space?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, open banking won't work unless the banks are behind it. That banks need to build good APIs, and as Hanna alluded to, that banks, if banks don't build good APIs, then all current forms of access screen scraping will stop, because ultimately banks are going to introduce strong customer authentication, move towards mobile biometric authentication, and that's going to stop any form of unattended screen scraping. So banks really have to produce good APIs. So the question is, what we're seeing in the UK is it started off the banks doing it because they were told to do it, and they didn't do a very good job to start with. What we then saw is that eventually they were forced to do a better job by some quite tough sort of regulations put in front of them. And that's happened now in Europe as well. It's starting to happen in Europe, but it's still some way behind the rest of the UK. But what's interesting now is you're starting to see banks looking at their APIs as a commercial channel and looking at use cases which offer value. Hanna mentioned identity. I think that's a key one. You know, it's not part of the regulatory requirement, but it's one of the areas that banks are looking to say, well, actually, we built the framework to provide data. We could also provide data relating to a customer's identity. We're not mandated to do it, but we could do it. And if we did it, we could monetize that in different ways. But there are other ways that banks could monetize this and monetize APIs. You know, we mentioned lending. I'm just going to give you two very quick examples. So one is HSBC. I'm mentioning this because they mentioned this in public before. HSBC were looking at open banking from day one as a sort of a good thing for them. And so what they did, they were looking at consuming the APIs of other banks to provide lending. So as a lender, they were saying, as a lender, we would like to offer loans to customers who don't bank with us. They didn't previously do it because it was too risky, unless it was big commercial loans. It was too risky for personal and small business lending. So they decided to consume the APIs of other banks so that they could offer the customers of those banks an API, a loan via an open banking API. They worked out it'd be quite difficult and expensive to do that themselves because, you know, they're a big bank with lots of process and maybe not access to the best tech. So they partnered with a regulated fintech called AccountScore, and in partnership with that fintech, they built an open banking API consumption validation service within about 6 months, and for less than £1 million. It would cost them a lot more to try and do it themselves. Would have taken them years. And all of a sudden, they can now offer loans to customers who don't bank with them. So that's good for customers, because customers who bank with another bank get an opportunity to get a loan at a better rate from HSBC. It's good for HSBC, obviously, because they can offer loans to more customers, and they can do it for less money and more quickly than they could if they tried to do it themselves. And obviously, it's very good for the fintech involved, because you know, they get access to extending their service to offer that to more customers. So it's a kind of win-win-win situation. You know, there are other examples as well. There's a small business fintech in the UK called Calgira. They offer a service which basically provides vulnerable customers with a dashboard that they can give access to a trusted a guardian or a power of attorney can have access to a vulnerable customer's bank account in read-only mode, so they can monitor that customer, that vulnerable customer. If there's something strange happening to that customer's bank account, that the trustee or the power of attorney can step in and intervene. And that's a really good use case. Now, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of money, but it's something that I think all banks should be doing, but they might not be able to do it very easily themselves. Again, they could partner with a fintech, and it could be a really good sort of social responsibility thing that banks could offer to their vulnerable customers. So those examples are things that they don't solve all the open banking use cases, and they're not things that are the be all and end all, but they are the sort of use cases that banks would have no downside at all in offering from day one. And if there's not a regulatory mandate for banks to do this, then why don't banks start, you know, if there's a standard, then this could be the first phase of open banking in Canada, where the regulations aren't yet fully up and running. There isn't a mandate yet, maybe, but this is something that banks could be doing literally tomorrow. If the standard's there, why not build it tomorrow? You've certainly got fintechs, whether they're in Canada or in other markets, who want to come in and offer this in Canada. It would offer value to Canadian citizens right now, and it could be the first phase of open banking. So I don't think it has to start with a heavy mandate, but I think you might need that if you want to meet other use cases, certainly.
Yeah, great point, actually. So then from fintechs are typically looked at as disruptors. Here you're talking about enablers and really providing key value again to the Canadian consumer. Senator, I've heard you mention in past that this really needs to be a market-led initiative. Perhaps you can expand on this for us.
Well, I think to be clear, what I've said is that the market can lead. My preference would be the government regulators have a key responsibility here that has not been, they've not taken up. They've, we're seeing a bit of ragging the puck as far as I'm concerned in that regard. Sorry, Chris, that's a Canadian expression that you probably won't get. But the opportunity that I see is for us to have the private sector focus on what, and I apologize for noise in the background if it's coming through. What would be great is to have the private sector focusing on what areas of agreement are there and what areas of disagreement are there, and why there's disagreement, and have a transparent process that is led by the private sector to speed up things on behalf of government. So, but again, to do that, you've got to have a balanced and transparent approach. You've got to have governance that is respecting three key groups: fintechs, banks, and consumers. And I think that could be incredibly helpful to help government focus their attention on areas of disagreement, so that we can start to really move this ahead quickly and become the fast follower that Canada can become here. I think Chris has laid that out really well. Hanna's identified all the different ways in which Canadians can benefit. So for me, that would be what I would be focused on right now, is how can we have a balanced approach to say, we agree here, let's get moving on these areas. We disagree here, here's the reasons why, and hand those over to the regulators, and have the regulators run a process for resolving those differences in a way that respects the different groups at the table. Well said,
Senator. All right, we're going to move in here to just our final piece. Yet before we do, we wanted to announce today that we're really excited to share with you that OBIC has actually partnered with Ozone and Axway to provide Canada with Canadian fintechs and banks a place to engage in an open banking framework with Ozone's developer sandbox, which is supported by Axway. This will allow fintechs to develop their market offering upon a global banking standard such as the UK or Berlin Group standard, as well as North American FTX standard, and the very near future, the Canadian FTX standard. The partnership and developer portal, Canada has now entered into what we would like to say is the open banking economy itself. And so unofficially, we're looking at the launch being in September. One of the key elements that we're going to be doing here is a global open banking hackathon with the purpose of accelerating Canada's readiness for open banking. As you've heard everyone state here today, we can be fast followers, and really we can learn from other jurisdictions with regard to what they have learned around open banking, and really fast forward the thinking in our own country and help our fintechs shift their thinking towards supporting the Canadian consumer itself. So on behalf of myself and OBIC, I would like to thank Chris, CEO of Ozone, and a shout out to Eyal Savan, Mr. Open Banking and Axway's head of open banking, for believing in OBIC's vision for Canada itself. So with a couple minutes here, Chris, any comments with regards to this partnership, and really what can you speak more so to what Ozone intends to bring to the Canadian market?
Yeah, so I think you've kind of summarised it, but effectively what we've got is, and this is something that already exists. So it's effectively a set of banks that are model banks that have got synthetic data that simulates the behaviour of a real bank or real financial institution. We've got a number of these now in this sandbox that. On top of those banks, we've got APIs in different flavors. We've got the FTX specification. We've got the UK Open Banking, Berlin Group specification. And this is all based on this kind of OpenID foundation. It's called the FAPI profile. So there's a kind of security model. So it looks and behaves like a live ecosystem of banks in different markets with different customers, different product sets, etc. And the idea is that fintechs can literally come along and connect to this sandbox and build actually fully working products and services that sit on top of these reference banks. But it doesn't expose in itself. It doesn't expose any actual customers or customer data. We just run a hackathon actually in Brazil. I think it's probably one of the largest, if not the largest, open banking hackathon that's been run to date anywhere globally. Based on this platform, we had over 200 participants building about products in over a weekend the week before last. So it's something that exists. We'd very much like to get a hackathon up and running in Canada ASAP with the three partners that we've got on the screen there. I think this would be a really good first step in actually showing people what open banking looks like and allowing developers to build real apps on top of something. So really keen to get this up and running.
Wonderful, thank you, Chris. Senator Hanna, any comments with regards to this opportunity?
Hanna, please go ahead.
I was going to say, as a fintech, that sounds extremely exciting. I'm interested to see how that plays out.
And I'm with you, Hanna. I just think this is fantastic news. I'm excited I get goosebumps when I see Canadian innovators getting empowered in a way to move their ideas to commercialization and market opportunities and to creating value for customers that then builds value in their businesses. And so I just commend you on this effort. I think, again, it accelerates the need for government involvement. We cannot have government pulling back now as they have been. We've got to have them leaning in and working hard to take advantage of this. Canada's got right now one of the best innovation economies in the world. We're very, very fortunate over the last 5 years. Things have really come together in a lot of settings. Even Halifax and St. John's, Newfoundland, we've got phenomenal things happening. And so empowering our entrepreneurs and integrating our innovation strategy with our economic and social priorities is going to be really, really important. Fintechs have proven they can help marginalized groups in ways traditional banks can't. We've got tremendous opportunity to demonstrate that value through a sandbox and inspire our innovators. And I can't wait till you have the first hackathon in Canada and to see what comes out the other side, because I'm a real believer in Canadian innovators and entrepreneurs. So that, for me, this is inspiring, and it just means government of Canada, finance has got to get a move on here.
Excellent, thank you very much, great comments. Okay, let's bounce into a couple questions here. We're running short on time, but no worries. Here's a great question. We've had a lot of questions come in around, access to data, and along with how fintechs can get that. I think that, in a nutshell, open banking provides that API. However, with that though, we need the incumbents who have been the custodians of the data to allow consumers consent to share that data itself. But here's something that someone's posted here. Here's a question, and perhaps one of you three can answer it. Here is the question: what can be done to entice incumbents, the big banks, to participate more productively in regards to open banking? Perhaps Hanna or Chris, would you like to take that?
Hanna, John.
Chris, you're probably better positioned in the sense of you've probably seen a lot of the fintechs in the UK that are essentially creating solutions for large incumbents to take advantage of the data that they have and figure out how to structure it to derive specific types of information. So some examples that I've seen are, I'm forgetting the company's name, but essentially they create different sets of APIs based on different products. So, if a bank is interested in learning more about spending behavior of their client for their credit card, so they can incentivize specific credit cards to them, they can have access to that data. But another use case I read about actually just the other day that I thought was super interesting, and which was if you go to an actual store and you see a bunch of terminals, a lot of times you'll see like a TD Bank terminal. In some countries now, you can on the spot, when you're buying something, just tap into, let's just say, your TD Bank e-wallet, and then request a loan on the spot to pay for that specific item that you're purchasing if you don't have the means or whatever. And essentially that's just looking at different use cases where you can embed different financial products in themselves to improve, you know, consumers' access to them, but also you're allowing for different incentives and means to do that. And I think that would be a really significant incentive for incumbents to more openly embrace open banking. And I think the thing that people forget about is open banking, if done properly, also means reciprocity. They also get access to our data that we have on clients. And fintechs tend to be better at collecting data and understanding their clients and creating more consumer focused products. And so it goes both ways.
Yeah, I think just to kind of lead on that, I think there's a kind of whole collaboration partnership angle with open banking. So, you know, what we're talking about in open banking, it's another channel. It's another channel to provide new, you know, either better or new services to customers. And it's a channel that you can, if you build it properly, it gives you a great opportunity to partner with fintechs as an incumbent to do that. So focusing on the use cases which meet those requirements. I'm not saying those are the only use cases, but those use cases will get the incumbents, or should get the incumbents, very excited, combined with, you know, not reinventing the wheel. I do keep coming back to this, but it's important that we have standards that can be implemented very efficiently. And that's, you know, why kind of that's the heart of why, you know, ourselves and Axway are looking to kind of partner on this, because, you know, it shouldn't be complex or expensive for banks to implement this. And, you know, we yes, it was difficult in the UK, but they were going first. Banks in other markets now can learn from that and can use technology that exists that can be plugged in, you know, much more easily and at lower cost to a core banking system. So it should be lower cost. And if we focus on the kind of use cases where banks can partner and offer new services, then I think that's a good way of getting incumbents interested.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, we're at the top of the hour here. So with that, then I'd like to thank the panelists. I really appreciate your insight and your efforts that you put forth in past to get to the point where you're at today in regards to your thinking. I know the effort it takes to become what I would say are experts in your own right. So for those that are still with us, which is quite a few, I just, you know, we need open banking here in Canada. It's of paramount importance. You know, open banking itself really doesn't make a lot of sense, yet I hope today you've come to a deeper understanding of what open banking is. So what can you do to really share the momentum of open banking in Canada? Educate yourself, you know, inform others on the value of open banking. Join our membership at OBICcanada.ca or volunteer for one of our working groups. We've got some really solid working groups right now that are focused not only on the regulatory elements, but we're really looking at how we can increase the voice of fintechs as well as representing ultimately the consumers here. So we've got some working groups. Just reach out to us and we'll find a place for you to get involved with us here at Open Banking. So the resources that were spoken to today, you will find those on our website. And again, any more information, please just drop us a line at Open Banking Initiative Canada, and we'll do our best to help you steer through, you know, this next period of open banking and this new frontier of open banking. And feel free to, again, share the great news about Open Banking Canada and our sandbox. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. Take care and be well.